Hi everyone, my name's Christine Lewis and we are continuing a little series of chats on God in the ordinary. This particular chat or video is a follow-on from the last one, covering the topic of contentment in the ordinary. And where I wanted to start today was to look at Moses, the life of Moses, the Old Testament character Moses. I wanted to sort of pull the curtains back a little bit and have a look at his life in Midian, because Midian was a place that actually represented, it was a time and place that represented the ordinary life for Moses. It was an enforced ordinary. And somehow in this enforced ordinary, Moses managed to learn contentment. And so all I can say is if Moses managed to do it, you know what, we can. You know, our ordinary isn't enforced ordinary. And so, so just let's have a little look at what we can learn from his journey into contentment, from frustration, defeat and frustration into contentment. So then, Moses was an Israelite, and he was born to Amram and Jochebed. He was born at a time when Israel was a slave nation. They were slaves to the most powerful nation in the known world, which was Egypt, and they had been like slaves for roughly about 400 years, I believe, at the time of Moses' birth. Anyway, not only was he born into that slave environment, Moses was born at a time when the Pharaoh of the day, in his paranoia concerning the growth of this slave nation, really ate him up. And out of that paranoia, what he did was to decree that all the male children under the age of 2 were to be killed off. And this is when Moses was born. Wow. Jochebed, his mama, had a decree of her own. She said, not on my watch. You're not having my baby. Spunky lady. I think she's one of the most underestimated female characters of the Old Testament. Spunky lady, you're not having my child. And she made a plan to hide this little Moses for as long as she possibly could. And she hid him. She managed to hide him for 3 months. And I tell you what, during those 3 months, there would have been some real heroic moments for Jochebed. We can't even begin to imagine the danger that she would have put herself and her whole family in doing what she did. But anyway, she managed it, and after 3 months, the next plan, in inverted commas there, the next plan was to send this 3-month bundle of joy down the Nile in a little basket. And in the providence of God, in the great plan and providence of God, it was Pharaoh's daughter who went into the Nile and pulled him out. In fact, I think it was one of her servants, one of her maids, I think. But anyway, the bottom line is that Moses ended up in Pharaoh's household as a son to Pharaoh's daughter. Now, we don't know any detail about, like Jesus really, those early years of Jesus. We don't know the detail of his life in the Pharaohic household. But what we do know is who he became. We know who he became, and we know how he became it without all of the nitty-gritty detail. Because the Bible tells us over in the book of Acts, I think it says that Moses, this is like, we're talking about the man Moses now, that Moses was mighty in word and mighty in deed, and that he was trained in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. In the writings of Josephus, we also read that Moses actually was a military genius. He really was the man of the hour. And mighty in word, what does that tell you? It tells you that this man would have commanded the people's attention. He had incredible oratory skills. He'd have commanded attention. He would have been a great influencer. But not only was he mighty in word, he was mighty in deed. He didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk. As Josephus said, a military genius, and that he was trained in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. So, he was the man, wasn't he? of the day. Anyway, at the age of 40, what we read in the Word is that two things happened that changed his life forever, and that would ultimately, in the end, change the life of the Israelite nation. Two things happened, and they happened succinctly. They happened at the same time, even though they were poles apart, yet they were like really interconnected. Because the Bible tells us this. It tells us that Moses must have had some big breakup with his stepmom, because it tells us that he refused to be the son of Pharaoh's daughter. There was a point around about the age of 40, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, which obviously tells us that he had some big clash with his stepmother. And again, the writings of Josephus tell us that Pharaoh's daughter was actually a very politically driven woman. She was politically ambitious, and what we can read between the lines is that she would have visited those political ambitions onto Moses. And I would say that the world's plan for Moses through his stepmom was that he was to be the next Pharaoh. That was definitely in line in his future. And so as I sort of read the story and read between the lines, what I sort of imagine, let's say, is that there was a real argument concerning his future between him and his mum. Why the argument happened, it would seem to me, is because at the same time that his mum was getting him ready to fulfill her political ambition, at the same time there was a move of God on his heart. That the Lord filled the heart, very emotional, that the Lord filled this man's heart with compassion for the Israelites. And it would have been an unfamiliar feeling to Moses. Maybe it was something that confused him. All he knew was that he had compassion for this nation. And maybe he tried to talk this through with his mum, who just, who wasn't having any of it. Anyway, there was this big clash, and Moses had a choice to make. Would he go the way of the world? Would he follow that political path, or would he follow the path of compassion? And our lovely Moses, oh dear, I'm getting all emotional. And our lovely Moses followed the path of compassion. And he attempted to step out, as I said earlier, to fulfill this call. He had no idea what the call was. He just knew that he was impassioned to help them. And so he stepped out in his own power. Remember, he was mighty in word, mighty in deed. And he stepped out in that power, in that natural power, to try and do something to help them. And it was disastrous. He ended up killing an Egyptian, and who was bullying one of the Israelites. And so Moses, in an instant, trying to answer the call of God, even though he perhaps didn't recognise it as a call of God, he just knew there was something that he couldn't escape from that was moving him to action. And as he stepped out, he went from hero to zero, boom, just like that. And Moses had to flee, because there was a price on his head now. So he fled, and he ended up in this place called Midian, as we said, was a place, a time and a place that represented his ordinary. So Moses moves out of the Pharaohic environment, and he finds himself in this little back place called Midian, where he meets this woman named Zipporah. Zipporah became his wife. She was the daughter of Jethro. He fell in love with her. He had, she had his children, and he became a shepherd. And so for the next 40 years, this was the life of Moses. He was a shepherd in the backwaters of Midian. And the truth is that this ordinary life that would have been really hard for Moses, this would not have been an easy transition. Let's remember who he was. He was this military genius. He was this great man. Suddenly he's in the backside of the desert. Yes, he's got a wonderful wife and wonderful kids. But you know what? To let those things go would have been an incredible battle on the inside of Moses. And so his ordinary life changed Moses. what he went through over the next 40 years, what I would call the great undoing. Remember, he was trained in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. That wisdom was idolatrous in nature. And so through those 40 years, the Lord had to deliver this man from idolatrous education. He had to deliver him from his own personal ambitions, all of that need for power and glory and the worship of men. He had to deliver him from all of that stuff. He would have had to have delivered him from the lust of the world that he'd grown up in. So getting to the place of contentment for Moses was not an easy task. This was not duck to water. He would have had to have really made a conscious decision at some point that he was going to live content, because like I say, there would have been battle upon battle that would have been happening in the life of Moses during his time in Midian. A yearning to go back, a yearning for those things that had gone by. But in order to be content, the reality is that Moses had to let it all go. Bit by bit, he had to let it go. It tells us in Exodus 2:21 that Moses was content. In the end, he got there. The word content in the Hebrew language actually means to yield. And it's describing a volitional act, not an act prompted by feelings. In other words, Moses got to the point where he just about had enough. He'd had enough of the internal battles. And he yielded. He had to yield all of his issues. He had to yield it all to God in order to move forward. And that's what he did. He became content. This was a pivotal moment in the life of Moses, because we know after that point of contentment, Moses is out in another ordinary day, tending to the sheep. And the Lord is there. He has this incredible encounter. Oh, wow, this is so emotional. Forgive me. He had this incredible encounter with God, didn't he, at the burning bush. Remember, this is after he became content in the ordinary. And the Lord revealed his name to him, that his name was Yahweh. And not only did he reveal himself to Moses, he revealed Moses to Moses. And he sent him into his ultimate call. Through his ordinary life, through the changes that occurred in the heart and life of Moses in his ordinary, God reset history. Because Moses came to that point of yielding all to the Lord and chose contentment, God was able to reset history. How marvellous is that, people? So, I have to end because my time is really coming to an end. After that pivotal moment, of contentment, God uses this man, Moses, to deliver a nation from a 400-year bondage to the most powerful nation in the known world. Talk about the power of contentment, and when Moses stood before that Pharaoh with those iconic words in his mouth, "Let my people go," you know what? It was Moses, the man of the ordinary life, that stood in front of Moses. Because we don't graduate from the ordinary life. It stays with us. Like I said last time, we just learn to do everything well so that the ordinary transforms into something extraordinary. Moses is ordinary transformed into something extraordinary. And the pivotal moment in that transformation was the moment of contentment. So I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you for listening. I really hope that what I've shared with you today does something to encourage you, to inspire you, to help you believe in your ordinary, to help you to move forward in your ordinary, to help you transform the ordinary into the extraordinary right where you are. So big hugs, big blessing. Let's go for it together. In Jesus' name, amen.